aspects of health. Wellbeing Journal is now available in both print and digital version. Order online at wellbeingjournal.com. All right, Kip Watson. She is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor and also a sports psychology professional. She has 2 master's degrees and nearly 20 years of experience with coaches, athletes, families, and corporate teams. She is a certified high-performance coach and a former professional athlete. We're talking about relationships require negotiation. We're picking this up from last week. Yeah. Winning secrets of master negotiators. So let's see. What's the first key?
Well, I think let's take this word negotiation and let's change it to maybe influence. I think it is more about influence. And it's really what you're trying to do is nudge people or move people's opinion, view, decision-making process, right?
Through like persuasive speaking?
It is persuasion, right? Influence. It could be in a more, and this is where we get into some verbiage, I know, and semantics. You don't want to be manipulative because that's more of an ill intent, where influence is more of, this is a joint decision that we're trying to make that works out the best of both worlds, so to speak.
Well, yeah, because manipulation, people can tell when you're trying to manipulate them, first of all. And I don't think you should ever persuade. And I think if you are very passionate about something, that persuasion is very natural. And you're more likely to bring that person closer to you, if you will, than you would through trying to manipulate them, right?
I think it is both a skill and an art to that. Right? Yeah. And so I think when it's done well, there are certain skills that are involved. And probably the most important one, which we touched on last time, is the ability to listen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which seems to be, and Vaughn, you can probably attest to this, the most difficult thing for people to do, especially when emotions are flying high. Yeah. Like I'm about to go actually do a negotiation session between an athlete and a mom, and it's probably going to be a difficult conversation to have. There's going to be tough feelings on both sides, but we've got to come to a mutual agreement about how we're going to solve a particular problem, right? And so I have to, before we can solve it, I got to have each side listen to what's important to the other.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say is that, we don't get rewarded for listening in our society. We typically get rewarded for talking. We learn how to talk and, persuade people. However, I usually tell people, especially couples that come into my office, that understanding precedes problem solving. Always. Doesn't matter what you're doing.
Say that again.
Understanding precedes problem solving. So you have to first try to understand someone and then be understood. So,
yeah.
And it's exactly, you have problem discussion first, and you do not have to have agreement here. You do have to listen, you have to validate, you have to acknowledge, and that's different than agreement. And then
what relationships are the most difficult? To persuade someone, like mother-child, husband-wife.
I don't know that you could probably say one's more difficult than the other. I think when it involves family members, there's definitely more emotional tie to it. Yeah. Versus if you're sitting at, in a boardroom negotiating a deal, right? There's less emotion involved because it really is more of a business deal.
Well, speaking of business, I was thinking, it's funny you say that because I was thinking you really want to get under somebody's skin, get a little too close to their wallet and try to persuade them of something, right?
Well, and that's often an area, right, even between couples, that we have to have a good negotiation of how we're going to run our household, how we are going to spend money, right? Are we going to have an agree upon amount where we don't have to ask each other's permission to spend that amount of money, right? But when it reaches a certain threshold, then we need to talk to each other first before we spend that money.
I don't even like the word permission. You need to get permission from your spouse. What is up with that?
Yes, you do.
You discuss it. It's not like you're at school getting permission to leave the room.
But I'm sorry, you can't just walk out the door and go buy a BMW unless you've had a conversation with me about it first.
Permission reminds me of the word like obey, though, or
that's an important thing. There's obedience.
Oh, don't get me started.
It's about to get hot.
See,
We're doing a podcast after the broadcast, right?
Let me chime in right here.
Okay, chime in.
So from a research standpoint, especially for guys, is what's called accepting influence. Because men who do not accept influence, women bring more complaints to relationships. However, whenever men do not listen, attend to, and are mindful of their spouse, 81% of them end in divorce. And so you have to be able to accept influence within relationships and be able to be persuaded. Now, to your point a little bit earlier, when you say, is it hard to persuade certain people? I tend to find that whenever someone is egocentric, they're all about themselves, and they lack emotional intelligence. So they cannot put themselves in the shoes of someone else. They cannot have empathy, or they have difficulty having empathy for someone. Then I tend to have a more difficult time trying to influence that person but here's the thing. If I try to understand them and they feel understood and validated and they feel like they have empathy from me, then they tend to move a little bit closer to being able to be influenced. But that's the understanding preceding problem solving thing.
Validation is so important.
Oh, yeah.
It's so important. So it shuts down so much communication if that person is not validated.
Here's a statement that any of our listeners can use for validation. So whenever whenever someone's talking to you, you say, you know what, that makes sense to me. And what makes sense to me is, and then you repeat to that person what makes sense to you within the context of the conversation. And so that person is going to feel like, I feel validated. So a lot of times you can repeat the person, mirror that person, and then after that say, you know what, that makes sense to me, and what makes sense to me is.
Is that a form of manipulation, though, Kip? What do you think?
No.
Okay. I'm just asking.
I think that phrases like that and things like that show that I am attempting and probably getting, if I'm not getting it right, then you need to clarify for me. But it's a way to do that.
And the way, if you say it with kindness and love in your heart, not in a condescending way. That's why I went there with that. I just wanted to get clarification.
Well, it shows.
And validation.
So, you know what, Bernadette, that makes sense to me because you wouldn't. I'm joking with you right now.
Okay, so Kip, bottom line, what do master negotiators do well?
Listen.
Oh, I love it.
That's it. They listen. And I think they also recognize the power in not using why questions. Anytime you begin a question with why, then you're putting someone on the defense. And so it's better to ask questions or having a line of questioning if you need to ask questions that begin with how.
How does this keep happening?
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you doing? What are some other ones?
Well, I think, we've kind of talked about here, using empathy and humor as you're talking about an issue is really crucial and important, rather than sort of that high level, more of those negative type feelings that we experience, right? If we can talk about them with some empathy and humor, then that negotiation or that conversation tends to go better.
Yeah. And putting yourself in that other person's shoes, or at least try to.
Well,
sometimes it's very difficult.
It is very difficult. And then sometimes have this, like I saw this last night actually in a session where the son was like, Mom, you just don't understand. You keep comparing everything to yourself. Well, that's how sometimes people try to relate. But they also got to, if that's being said, then you got to stop that behavior.
Absolutely.
And go back to even the phrase Vaughn said. What I hear you saying is, that makes sense to me. Here's what I understand is important to you.
I love it. Kip Watson, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. You can find Kip Watson on Twitter at KipFit. That's at KipFit. And Von Eaglin at WeFixBrains.com. Thank you so much, you guys, for being in studio. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. You know what? You get one body, you get one mind, and you get one life. Get out there today and make the most of it.